call the Nashville Town Council meeting to order for August the 20th, 2024. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let us pray. Father, we invite you into this meeting tonight to lead us and guide us and give us your wisdom in making decisions for the citizens of Nashville. Amen. Okay, the first item on our agenda is our minutes from August 6th. Were there any corrections to those minutes? If there are no corrections, do I hear a motion for us to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is public comment. We have one tonight, James Baker.
Hello, everyone. I have came up here a couple of times and brought up the issue about the pothole. You know, it seems kind of ridiculous. You know, this is the third, I think, time the hole got filled in with rock. But of course, with that storm and everything, it's all blown out again. And now we got school getting ready to start next week, and this is a hazard. And also, back when they were doing that cloud-wise, bringing the fiber optic, they busted the water main right in front of my house. And I mean, we had a tremendous amount of water that laid on that road, and it became spongy. Now the surface on the top of that, on Green Street between Austin and to Collins, the asphalt's just busting up now. And I just, you know, I think this should have been addressed before school started. That's
Thank you for making us aware of it, James. We appreciate it. I'm going to take the privilege to move our to the item B on our agenda, and we'll come back to A. So if you would turn to item B, and this is the Golden Leaf reimbursement.
Thank you, Mayor. So the town received notice August 2nd from the Golden Leaf Foundation that it was overpaid on our first site development grant in the Nashville Business Center. That was for the grubbing and the clearing of that 14 acres by $21,638. I worked with Suzanne Keel, the program specialist with the Golden Leaf Foundation, and unfortunately verified the overpayment. It was a math error in the calculation of the final disbursement. We were awarded $188,000. Our total project cost was $168,000. I requested it all. They paid it all. So we got more money from the Golden Leaf than our project costs. So they're asking respectfully that we pay that back. And wanting to stay in good standing with the Golden Leaf Foundation, I'd like to recommend to the council that we do that we pay that back. Our finance director, Tressa Rudd, recommends we sold lot 4 to Project Lego for $134,000, and she and I are recommending we take $21,638 of that and pay back the Golden Leaf Foundation.
Any questions?
I got one. Why would we not take the money from where we put it?
Yeah, where's the overage at? What do we do with the overage?
It's in fund balance.
It's in fund balance.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's where the proceeds of the sale went to.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean,
So it's 6.5 another.
yes.
So do I hear a motion to approve budget amendment number 8, authorizing reimbursement of $21,638 to the Golden Leaf Foundation?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Now let's return to item number A, which is our zoning and ordinances that we've been reviewing. So that is our A. So everybody get those out, unless Sean.
Once again, Council and Mayor, as you know, we have been working on updating our zoning ordinance for conditional rezoning, and we hired the InFocus team to help us handle this task. The InFocus team also handled some other things for us in our ordinance that we found as we pretty much got going through this. So if you don't mind, Mayor, I will turn it over and yield to Mr. Harvey from InFocus, who will lead us through the way of some question and answer session with the council and as to provide updates and orders. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Harvey from InFocus.
Okay, thank you. Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello again. Michael Harvey with InFocus. It's good to see you all. Unsurprising to some of you, this project, which was originally just intended to try and solve a couple problems with your table permitted uses, has taken on a life of its own to try to address some other issues in your code. And this was an attempt to address concerns from your manager, your planning department staff, your planning board, and for some meetings with you all. So let me first of all state that we wouldn't be where we are tonight without a lot of hard work from your management staff, your planning department staff, a lot of input from you and a lot of input from your planning board. So this has been done in a very expedited fashion, and you all deserve a round of applause and a pat on the back. You need to give your staff a pat on the back because they've been very diligent in giving me some feedback about what they want to see in this code. And we've tried to be as responsive as humanly possible to update your ordinance. That being said, your attorney and I obviously have had a conversation tonight. He's identified some other concerns he has external to the original contract that he would like my assistance to try to fix. In talking with your manager, we know that tonight you're not going to be adopting this ordinance because your manager's office has also asked me if I could address a couple of other nuance issues, which we're going to try to help you do. And I know you all have some questions, so let me just end some discussion tonight. I'm going to take some feedback from you all tonight and begin working to address some additional comments from the manager and from the attorney. And I'd like to hear from you this evening on other items of concern you may have or other requests in terms of formatting. So what did we do with your ordinance? I think is the big question you all would like to hear and those in the audience would like to know. Well, first of all, it's been updated to reflect current provisions of North Carolina state law. And that's one of the biggies. The North Carolina General Assembly in its infinite wisdom, and this is a good thing, it is fun to lampoon and berate the General Assembly when they don't do things correctly, and trust me, there's lots of actions they've done recently that deserve to be lampooned. They consolidated all regulatory standards giving local government, either county or municipality, into one central section. Previously, municipalities and counties had to go to 2 to 3 different chapters of state law to find their authority to enact land use regulation. Don't have to do that anymore. You go to one central section. It's called 160D. Now, your staff did a really good job of updating most of the code. Unfortunately, there were some tools that were missing from that update. No fault of your staff's, it just wasn't necessarily their focus. Their focus was to make sure that your code met the minimum requirements of state law to be enforced properly. Number one, did you have a current and enforceable land use plan so that you could actually implement land use policy? You do, and it's properly referenced in your ordinance. They provided the proper citation. Do you have all the proper citations to all the regulatory standards and sections in state law that enable you to actually engage in subdivision activity, engage in land use regulation? Yes, that was their focus, and you have a conforming ordinance. Again, that was a lot of hard work done by your staff, and they should be commended for it. And I'm not also not forgetting your attorney that helped them with that as well. What did we do? We provided some nuance to your code by giving you some additional tools you didn't have. The big thing we were asked to do was provide you with conditional zoning. I know some of you have heard me talk about this before, and I don't want to belabor the point. Conditional zoning is the process where you as a board have an opportunity to review a site-specific development plan for a very specific land use as part of a zoning atlas amendment. You're working with a developer who's proposing a specific use with a site plan where you have an opportunity to discuss the imposition of conditions. While those conditions have to be mutually agreed to, it is a legislative process where they have to provide specific examples of what they're going to be doing. That is a valuable tool for you. And what we were tasked with doing is examining your current table of permitted uses and finding activities that might be best handled through that conditional zoning process. Part of this recommendation is taking several land uses and putting them in what we're calling conditional zone districts. There are going to be several activities that are only going to be permitted going through that process. Now, what does that entail? Your planning board's going to review it, make a recommendation. You'll have to hold a legislative hearing reviewing the site plan and either agree or not agree to a rezoning and approving a site plan. Then your staff's responsible for approving a final site plan and construction plans allowing development of property. One big example of a land use will be multifamily apartment style development that will be occurring in certain zoning designations throughout your community. All this has to be done consistent with your adopted comprehensive plan. Remember that you are still obligated through the conditional zoning process to make a finding statement of consistency and reasonableness that the rezoning request and the development proposal is consistent with your comprehensive land use plan. It can't be inconsistent with that document. So you have the authority still to say this doesn't meet our land use plan, it doesn't meet our vision for what Nashville is going to be with this document. Keeps you in the driver's seat. We also updated several provisions of your code. We added under jurisdiction 1822 a state of emergency. One concern that was provided by your planning department and your manager, what happens in a state of emergency where we may have to work with people on temporary housing, emergency housing? We've provided you a section that addresses that very issue. It allows for the suspension with your all's acquiescence, you have to approve it, of zoning permitting process for a set period of time to allow for temporary housing in the event of a catastrophic incident when there's a state-declared state of emergency. That can allow temporary housing to be deployed in the town to address housing needs. That could be a hurricane, a mass tornado, any instance where there's a declared state of emergency. We've updated a lot of your definitions, including ensuring that there's adequate reference to adult establishments consistent with North Carolina general statute. Since the state law defines the use, why reinvent the wheel? There's no reason to. We have updated several of your definitions to reflect actual, practical, current policies in the planning and zoning world of 2024. One prime example is how we handle short-term rentals. That could be construed as Airbnb, hotel motel, or the rental of housing. We went through several of your definitions and added definitions for new land uses that we were adding, specifically dealing with industrial land uses that you didn't have, and even definitions for land uses that you did have that weren't adequately defined. We added definitions for conditional zoning. We included definitions from state law. Daycare is an example we took from the licensing provisions of the general statute. We added definition of evidentiary hearing, what the statute considers evidentiary hearing. Extraction of earth products, because we created a new land use category for that very activity so we can regulate it. We updated your definition of family care home to be consistent with state law. Because remember, North Carolina General Statute now says you cannot prohibit or limit family care homes in residential districts. You are able to establish a setback requirement between family care homes, but you can't prohibit them in single-family residential districts. We added new definitions for health and personal care facility and health services, consistent with recommended changes to your table of permitted uses. Manufactured home, you all, as a matter of policy, have enforced a concept of what a manufactured home is in the town of Nashville that's never been incorporated in this ordinance. You actually have a handout defining what a manufactured home is. Class A, Class B, etc. But that's never been codified in your code. It now is. It doesn't serve you all any good to hand a piece of paper to a customer, an applicant, and say, here's the definition if it doesn't appear in your ordinance. As we get out of the definition section, and I'm not trying to skip anything, I'm just trying to make reasonable use of your all's time before we get to your questions or comments. One other curious issue that caused me concern is that your table of dimensional standards was not in your ordinance. It actually appears on your town website. It's now in your ordinance where it should be. This is the table that defines minimum lot sizes for all your districts, your setbacks, dimensional standards. At the request of your staff, we added regulatory standards dealing with accessory buildings in section 18-54. We also provided standards governing development on corner lots by establishing in section 1857. Thank you, Randy. Standards for clear sight triangles at intersections where you didn't have any. There's an exemption in this section for the downtown district. All right, there we go. We're going to turn off one of the lights so everybody can see it. Sorry. This is to guarantee that you don't have any development in the corner portion of a lot that could create a public safety hazard, site visibility. And again, your downtown district is exempt because that's not what you want in your downtown district. But that is what you want in the rest of your community.
So the 25-foot would not apply downtown?
Correct. Your downtown district is specifically exempted. We were requested to add regulations on fences. This is setback and height for both residential and non-residential districts. That's in section 1858. This was also requested by members of your planning board. As also, we have a section governing what is considered acceptable and not acceptable materials for a fence, correct. One concern people had is they didn't want people to basically use junk materials to erect a fence. You can't do that with this standard. You don't have current standards now, and that was the concern. 1859, land uses involving hazardous chemicals is actually existing language we moved. Oh, and by the way, parenthetical question, and I apologize. Were the footnotes helpful to you folks to understand the rationale and the logic? Okay, thank you. We try. When we met with a couple of elected officials, there was a request for specific language dealing with sidewalks in zoning. So that's where section 1861 comes from. Connectivity for development, extension of existing sidewalks, and residential development as well. Establishment of districts, dimensional requirements. This is where the table in section 1889 comes back into play. So this is the table I'm talking about, folks. This did not exist in your ordinance for some reason. It exists on your webpage, but it needs to be in your code. If it's going to be enforced as part of your land use ordinance, it needs to be in the code itself. We clarified at Sean's request notes on setbacks and application of development standards, how the setbacks are going to be calculated, as well as provided notes on structures and uses limited in yards, i.e., there can be no principal structure in a setback, where accessory structures are going to be located on a yard in terms of setbacks, fences and walls, architectural features can encroach certain distance into setbacks, where signs are supposed to go in relation to a setback. Public transit shelters are not meant to abide by a setback. They can go into a required setback. And we also provided, at Sean's specific request, language dealing with outdoor storage. After talking with both the manager and the planning staff, we wanted to provide a section dealing with flexible development standards, which is here, number 6. I'm going to highlight it real quick. There are going to be situations where there may need to be flexibility in terms of the application of some of these standards. I'll call them minor tweaking, where does it make sense to require somebody to go to the Board of Adjustment to get a variance? This section does give your planning staff limited, and I'm going to stress very limited authority to offer relief under very set circumstances, and that is spelled out in subsection C. These are typically for lots of record where Sean and his staff would be allowed to grant in certain instances, a 10% reduction in a setback for lots of record where the lot predates the adoption of zoning regulations, to try to provide some level of flexibility. It's really designed to address older lots of record where is there a reason to force somebody to have to go through a variance proceeding? No, it really isn't. This provision gives Sean and his staff some semblance of opportunity to provide some relief, basic relief to the code. This also addresses some lot area and lot dimension requirement, building coverage and frontage. Density we don't mess with so much. Why? Because you're regulated by the state's watershed regulations. You can't play with density but so much, but we are going to get to density and watershed regulations in a minute. Sean does not have the authority to issue a exemption or a modification to a variance that's been granted by the Board of Adjustment. And that's what this section talks about. The Board of Adjustment has already provided relief. That's it. If the applicant needs more relief, he or she needs to go back to the Board of Adjustment and plead their case. Conditional zoning districts, we've talked about this in section 1890. This is one of the big Tools we're adding to your toolbox. This is the process where you're going to be reviewing a site-specific development plan, proposing a very specific permitted use. It's going to be reviewed as any other zoning atlas amendment. The only difference is you're getting a site-specific development plan and a very specific proposed land use. Remember, for a general use rezoning, you cannot ask what the proposed land use is. In this process, you are allowed, because it's mandated, it's required. It's what this process is designed to do. With respect to district regulations, the biggest change here is under number 4, watershed district standards. This was a note, and to be blunt, it was a throwaway note in some of your existing regulations right before you got to land uses, and it needed to be featured front and center. It was note 15. This is actually part of your overlay district standards for your watershed overlay district. It can't be treated as a note, and I'm not trying to be critical of your current ordinance, but this needs to be treated as an actual standard for your watershed overlay districts. So what we did was reorganize your ordinance and turn this into what it needs to be. It needs to be an actual development standard and process. So we relocated it to its true home, which is in the definitions of the district regulations. This puts it in central location where it actually is going to have application throughout the entire ordinance. This meets the state minimum model ordinance, which is what it needs to meet. This actually does address a concern that the manager and I and Sean have talked about ensuring that your ordinance will continue to be compliant with the state minimum watershed regulations. Because remember, that is an ongoing requirement for you all. And I think this strengthens any case that you have to argue with the state that you are continuing to be consistent with their requirements and standards. We have defined your various conditional districts. Remember that manufactured home parks is now going to be a conditional zoning district. So if somebody wants to develop a manufactured home park, they're going to come to you with a conditional zoning request. The plan unit development, that is going to be your multifamily development that we've talked about. We also have the residential and non-residential conditional districts, which we'll look at the table of permitted uses in a minute. And since we're at 18109, table of permitted uses, this is appropriate. We reconfigured this section. Uses permitted as a matter of right. There are land uses that you all need to just allow as a matter of simplicity in every zoning district throughout the town. And I've listed them here. That includes customary accessory land uses to principal land uses. So for a residential land use, that could be a storage shed. Remember, you now have zoning regulations governing what that looks like in terms of setbacks, in terms of size, in terms of location. Utility distribution lines are activities that should be permitted in every district because they're essentially utility infrastructure. Buildings and other temporary structures used in connection with the construction of a permanent building. We have regulations governing those now, as recommended by the InFocus team. Borrow pits, including reclamation by landfilling associated with state and federal highway projects. You may ask yourself, why do we want to allow that? Because state and federal law say you have to. You don't have a lot of choice. You have to allow it. Utility facilities within public right-of-way with the permission of the owner of the right-of-way. Off-street parking is required, accessory uses to a permitted use. So CVS up here has parking. That's going to be permitted. Public and private streets and roads developed in accordance with local or state requirements. That's going to be forbidden in every district. Why is that important? You don't want somebody arguing that there can't be a public or private street in any district because it's not necessarily spelled out in this ordinance. I've been in a community where it's been argued that the ordinance doesn't specify that streets are allowed, and that was 6 months of my life I'll never get back, and I don't want you all to fall into that same trap. I'll be blunt. Special use permits. Want to remind you all, we are recommending that you consider an amendment that allows these to be reviewed by your Board of Adjustment. Why am I recommending that? I want you all to remember that special use permits are land uses that you all, as a matter of policy, are saying are allowed in a given general use zoning district, but because of potential secondary impacts need a heightened level of permit review, where the applicant has an obligation to prove with competent material evidence and testimony that the use meets the ordinance. There is no political decision to be made. The only decision to be made is whether or not the use meets the ordinance, and the burden's on the applicant to do that. These permits are reviewed in an evidentiary hearing held in a quasi-judicial setting. I can understand after talking to a couple of you that part of your frustration, and I hear this in the 12 communities that I serve, and I've heard it for 30 years being in the planning game, that many elected officials get very frustrated because you all can't talk to your constituents who are very frustrated about a special use. And I can respect that. You want to talk to your constituents, but you can't because that's ex parte communication. And there's really honestly, and I hate to say it this way, because I know how it's going to make me sound, but I'm going to continue making the same statement I've made for 30 years in my career. There's nothing to talk about. The decision has already been made. The land use has been considered acceptable, provided that the applicant meets his or her burden going through the process. That's the hard part in terms of whether or not the land use should be allowed in that district. What's next is, does the applicant meet their burden with competent material evidence to prove that the land use should be developed? That is a decision that could be made by an impartial group of individuals. In this case, my recommendation is you consider the Board of Adjustment, because there is no political decision to be made. It is a decision to be made based on the facts and evidence. Now, you are under no obligation to take my recommendation, but I think we've restructured your ordinance to take the more, what I'll consider to be controversial land uses, and we are recommending those become conditional zoning uses, where I think that they deserve a heightened level of review, where they will still be handled and processed by this board. And those land uses that yes, I understand, they may be sensitive, but the burden is always going to be on an applicant to prove he or she meets the code. And I think once you review the standards, with the help of your staff, we've developed some pretty reasonable standards to help address the adjacent property owner impacts that hopefully will make you more comfortable to shift this to the Board of Adjustment. That's my stance. You may disagree with me, and I'll respect that, but that's my recommendation to you. There are land uses that I am specifically recommending you not allow through the conditional zoning process. Why? Most of them should only be reviewed either through a special use permit process or only be allowed in the district you've slated them to be permitted through in your ordinance. You don't want, for example, an airport, and that's just because it's the first one on my list, to be permitted anywhere in Nashville. You don't want an adult establishment, for example, to be permitted anywhere, and it's actually, excuse me, it's actually sexually oriented business listed here, adult establishment. You only want that in the district you've specified in this code. This list actually tells the reader, sorry, you can't do this through this process. You have got to do it consistent with this ordinance. So adult establishments, for example, is only permitted in your industrial district, subject to complying with separation requirements from sensitive land uses. That's all you got. You cannot come to this board through the conditional process and try to do it in another zoning district. The only opportunity you have is to go into your industrial district and do this land use. That's all you got. That's the only opportunity you have in this community. Does that make sense? Okay. So now your table. My first question to you all, does the table format work for you?
What do you mean by work? What do you mean by work?
Does it flow? Does it make sense?
As long as it makes sense to the planning director.
Okay. So what we've done, and I respect that comment, thank
Well,
you.
we didn't get the table until today.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It wasn't included in our original packet, so I haven't really been able to study it. If you could go over just what, like the little
Yep. So
signals are.
what we've done with the permitted use table, instead of having land uses as you currently do scattered throughout the code with some contradictory locations on things, we've actually grouped land uses into categories. So on the board, we have an agricultural land use category, we have an assembly land use category, and land uses are then broken down into each category. So under agricultural, for example, we list bona fide farm operation, and I'm reminding everybody that this is a by right land use with no zoning permit review per state law if it's in the ETJ. And that's per state law in your ETJ. You don't regulate bona fide farms in your ETJ. Farmers market, produce sales, farm supply store, feed mill, greenhouses, greenhouses on-premise sales, stables, commercial, processing facility. These are the land uses that we have grouped under this agricultural land use subcategory. So a P is permitted by right. A delta, or the triangle, means it's permitted subject to the applicant demonstrating compliance with standards. A blank means not permitted. And if you see an S, that means special use. Now, a P says you have to get zoning permit. Still got to get a zoning permit no matter what. The delta, or the triangle, indicates that you're going to have a site plan showing how you comply with these standards. Setbacks, landscaping, whatever the standard is. S is you're submitting a special use permit application. If it's blank, you don't get to develop that use in that district. And then obviously in the far corner here, we have provided you where the additional standards are located in the code. So under assembly land uses, examples include banquet hall, club or lodge, community center, museum, meeting facility, retreat center, conference center, place of worship. That takes the place of church because church could be construed as being too limiting. Place of worship is church, synagogue, mosque, any place of religious observance. Theater, indoor, outdoor, which would include an amphitheater. Automotive transportation land uses, broken down to airports, general aviation heliports. You'll note Right now, they're not permitted in Nashville until you tell me otherwise or you tell your staff otherwise. Bus passenger shelter, you'll see they're permitted everywhere. There are standards they have to abide by. Motor vehicle, it's broken down to maintenance, repair, sales, and rental. Postal and parcel delivery, UPS, FedEx, etc. Convenience store, that's without fuel pumps and sales and with fuel pumps and sales. Gas station, no gas station. Transportation terminals, etc. Care and educational facility. You have care center, that's both in-home and a facility, which is your, it's more of your commercial operation. Library, school, broken down to its various incarnations. Elementary, middle, and high school, that's both public and private. Performing arts, sports, recreation, university, college, vocational, trade, technical. Extractive land use, government land uses. We've split out those land use activities that we want to specifically regulate, which would include an ABC store, detention center, military installation, an armory, as an example. Manufacture, assembly, and processing, we've actually broken down into two categories. So we have food, which is the first table you see. And then we have other than food. So manufacturing, processing of food-related products, and then manufacturing or processing of non-food related products, so everything else. Why do you split them up? Because there are going to be locations where you want to encourage manufacturing of food-related items, and there are going to be areas where you're going to want to encourage manufacturing of just general manufacturing operations. We did provide you with a breakdown of research facilities, both with and without manufacturing. That's been big. We've seen in several other communities, and we think Nashville would want that. Medical land uses is the next category. Doctor's offices and the like, and we've also provided specific breakdown for hospital, vet clinic with no boarding, and then vet hospital, which includes boarding. Office and financial services. We wanted to provide a specific breakdown for building contractor's office that has with and without storage yards for their equipment or materials. And why the distinction? Because you're going to want to encourage and promote additional heightened setbacks for that storage yard from property lines and buffers. Your recreational land uses are broken down. Amusement parks, carnivals, botanical gardens, camp and summer camp facility, golf course, golf driving range, golf chip and putt courses, paintball and aerosoft, park, recreational facilities, both indoor and outdoor, racetrack, shooting ranges indoor and outdoor, residential land uses, dwelling. You have single family, two family, which is duplex, manufactured home, which is only allowed in your ag district and then in the mobile home park conditional zone district. Multifamily includes the single family attached townhomes, apartments, and then the condominium. The manufactured home park here, again, can only be done through the conditional zoning district. Family care home, remember as I talked about the definition, you got to allow those in every residential district, although we are giving you the standard for a half-mile separation between family care home as the state law allows. We have regulations for group homes now. Health and personal care facility, recreational vehicles, rooming houses, temporary residential use, which would include temporary use of a recreational vehicle, retail land uses. The planning board had requested some specific breakdown on vape shops, which we have added. Service land uses, and you can see the breakdown there. On the next page, telecommunication land uses. I've already promised your manager and your planning director we're going to have to come back and talk about telecommunication facilities at some point. You currently don't have any real regulations. You need some. It's going to take more than me on a couple of days or a couple of weeks to provide you some standards. It's going to be a little more involved than the time frame that this project provided me for me to give you something that's reasonable. It's going to take a little more study. I did provide you regulations on ham radio towers. I did provide standards on co-locations. That would govern antenna on existing buildings or existing structures. That's actually pretty reasonable to do. I'm talking about a telecom tower being erected. Utility land uses. I know that Sean wants me to double back with him and talk about solar facilities a little more in depth at a future date. And then we conclude by talking about waste management land uses and wholesale trade operations. So, ma'am, to go back to your specific question, what we tried to do is take your existing table of uses and group like uses into those land use categories that made sense, instead of having a list that didn't make sense and was hard to follow. And so that was the question as I started working with Randy and Sean about the lack of organization for your table concerned me. And the question that we posed to the planning board is, and the question I'm also now posing to you, this reorganization, is it easier to follow?
I think yes.
Okay.
I think my one comment with regard to this, though, is I wish that the titles of the things in here matched the definition titles that we have in the definition section. So, for example, like assembly land uses, that makes total sense. This is places where people assemble. However, assembly defined in the definition section is talking about putting parts together. The same with like the care homes. We refer to it as care centers and in-home and facilities. Yeah, I guess there's no further breakdown right here, but then in the definition section, we refer to it as care facility, and it breaks it out into child care and adult care in different sections. So I guess if we're going to group it together in here, I'd like to use terminology that matches the definition area if possible.
I can certainly do that, but what I want you to remember is that the definitions are intended to actually reflect the standards.
Right, and
Actually
we'll get to
in
that
the-
in the standards too, because
Right.
there's some mismatches of things in there where we refer to, again, we'll refer to care center because it's in here, but when it's in the other section, it's care facility, and it's
Well, I'm happy to try and retweak it, but the goal with the standards is to make sure that you are actually consistent with state law and not losing the causal link in state law. Assembly is an existing definition you all have. We didn't add it.
right.
If you'd like us to add the definition of the land use category, I can certainly do that.
Or even if we could just define each land use category, like as it comes up when you're
Sure.
doing the standards, where you can say this,
We can add a definition of each land use category.
that would be great.
That's not a problem.
Okay.
But the reason we didn't do that is because, quite candidly, to me, and again, it's because I work with this daily, so I'm not saying it's not important, but I know what I mean. But if you would prefer to have a definition of each category, we can certainly add that.
Okay.
Now, to go to the next comment you made, when you get to section 18-111, this is where the meat of the ordinance gets to standards for land uses. this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of we had to beef up your ordinance quite extensively. So a lot of your standards just didn't exist. And a lot of the standards you did have contradicted each other. So what staff attempted to do, what the Invoca staff attempted to do, and I probably worried Randy and Sean to death, as Randy won't look me in the eye now. We basically went standards for temporary uses, for each land use, for the majority of land uses, standards for, and I'm just going to the next one to give you the prime example, standards for agricultural land uses, so we kept it in sync with the table. So what I'm hearing you say is make sure that there's the causal nexus link, because you think it may be lacking. Your concern is it may be lacking.
Right.
Okay. One of the things we attempted to do with these standards is ensure that there is adequate setback and where appropriate mandated buffers. So the two tools you have in your code that you didn't have before, that you have now, or I'm recommending you have now, I'm sorry, don't need to get too far ahead of myself, is to ensure that there's adequate distance from property line for the use and the use in the activity. Now, that's just the activity. That doesn't necessarily count parking or other ancillary activity. So you could potentially have parking, but that's why we also added buffering in many instances. So remember that you have a buffer section, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. We're mandating and requiring in many instances a land use buffer be erected along common property lines for several uses to try to provide that separation from non-residential to residential areas to ensure that there will not be any negative secondary impact. Not in everything, but really where it comes from non-residential to residential, or higher intensity to lower intensity. And if you all have a comfort level with that, that's really what we've designed to do. When it comes to special uses, what we've tried to do is ensure that there will be no negative secondary impact from a special use to an adjacent land use. So one example that I'll throw out as we go down the list, so club or lodge, which is under assembly land uses, and that's under subsection C. This is permitted in a residential district. The applicant is required to provide a detailed narrative, description of the exact type of facility planned. Let me zoom in so everybody can see it. Site plan showing the location of the existing and proposed buildings, access points, building plans. The lot size shall be adequate for the method of sewage stormwater disposal and for the other improvements proposed to be required. Site plan has to show the boundaries of the site. Landscaping plan has to be the exact same scale as the site plan. You need to see the elevations of the building. Recreation activities have to observe a 100-foot setback. Why is that important? Because what you don't want is the recreation activity to be so close to an adjacent residential land use that any noise, activity, light, whatever, impacts your residential neighbor. Now remember, this would be a special use. The applicant has got to submit documentation showing that he or she meets this standard. If an applicant through the special use permitting process proves that he or she meets that standard, there's an obligation for the town to issue that permit, unless there's competent material evidence in the record indicating that they don't.
So does this include converting an existing building?
Yes. So if I own a residential house, well, I assume this is your question, so forgive me if I'm wrong. If I want to convert an existing house to a club or lodge, I have to show that I'm converting that property meeting all of these standards through this process. And if I can't, then I can't get the permit.
I guess I'm just looking at our current, like, community center. It definitely would not meet these requirements if built today.
Well, community center,
Because this says club, lodge, community center, banquet hall.
what zoning district is the community center in?
R10, it's right next to the elementary school.
And
It's on the
houses.
same property. It's
On
owned
the
by the
same-
school.
And then it says too, outdoor activities shall be buffered with a type 30-foot land use buffer. What exactly is that?
That's with a 30-foot land use buffer.
Is that, I haven't been through this entire thing yet, so do we define somewhere type 30?
You have a 30-foot land use buffer in your ordinance, yes. It originally existed in your subdivision ordinance. I had to move it from your subdivision ordinance to your zoning ordinance because it couldn't be enforced as part of your zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Let me just ask you this. So what I think I hear you beginning to start the conversation with is a lot of the adjustments you have made were made in your estimation and your level of expertise to bring us up to code and compliant with what state law would be current today.
That is true. Also, it was an attempt to try to make your ordinance make sense, to take your current standards and have them make sense, and to incorporate best practices.
Gotcha.
And to be fair, what I'm now looking for you all to tell me is that reasonable for you?
Right. That
I
makes sense.
personally believe what we've given you will work. I think you're going to give me some tweaks, which is why we're here, and that's why I want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
So, yeah. My goal and my strategy is to make sure that I give you an ordinance that you're satisfied with, obviously. Because last time I checked, I don't wear an orange robe and I'm not sitting on a mountaintop somewhere. I'm not trying to blow through the standard section, but you get the idea of how it's broken down. The problem with your current standard section is it contradicts itself. Your standards are not definitive. And what I mean by that is it doesn't give your staff anything specific to put their hat on to say, this is what I have to enforce. Some of it is actually very arbitrary, and that doesn't work. It doesn't give your staff the tools to be successful, and the problem for you all is it doesn't give you the tools or your other boards the tools to be successful either. So my job is to give you the tools to be successful. Now you're going to give me the feedback if you want me to tweak this a little bit.
Would it be possible, I hate to be like so nitpicky, just have piles and piles and pages of questions and I guess things that I'd like to see different. I really would love to do some sort of like work session where we might be able to sit down, because just looking at like the standard for government land use, for example. So that's G.
Okay?
With the setbacks that are provided there, saying regardless of the district, the land use shall observe a 50-foot setback from all property lines. It needs a 10-foot landscape area around the perimeter of the property. If we were to do that for, say, our town hall that we want to build downtown, or if we wanted to do a park or a rec center or something, these are all government uses, right? So like what, would that be limiting us in what we are able to do?
Well, parks are actually handled differently, but I understand the question you're asking. Remember that covers building only. It doesn't count parking and it doesn't count other infrastructure. But if you're asking me, is there opportunity to tweak the setback, the answer is yes. I gave you what basically is somewhat referenced in your code and put it here.
Okay.
If you wish to tweak it, I'm certainly not telling you, oh, no, you have to do this because, no, that's not how this works. But what I did was use your current regulatory standards as it's sort of spelled out in your code. If we need to revisit some of these standards, that's perfectly reasonable. That's
Okay.
why we're here. But my job is to kind of take what you have and sort of repackage it.
Well, Friday, we received a 250-page document. And obviously, we have lives besides this. So what I recommend, and with talking to other people and talking to Randy, maybe we continue to look through this, make notes, maybe even send them to Michael, and then we meet again and have a session, because I'm not prepared. I mean, I tried my hardest to be prepared, but I'm not.
happy to do whatever you want. And again, as I've told you all in separate meetings, my job here is to give you an ordinance that you're satisfied with. And obviously, if you want to give me some notes or ask me questions, that's,
I mean, because I have a lot too. I know Kate does, I know everybody else does too.
I don't want to diminish what you've done, because this is
No,
obviously
we
a
appreciate it.
huge,
I don't take this as
crazy,
diminishing
huge
anything
job.
I've done, so you're not offending me. And again, I think I've told you this all, you need to remember that InFocus considers itself an extension of your staff. I'm a member of your staff here, okay? Fair enough? I mean, that's why you hired us. So if you would like to give me, can we look at this way, this way, this way in an email, that's fine. Remember, your attorney has also asked me if there's an opportunity to look at sections that I didn't even touch. As your manager has asked me to look at sections we didn't even touch because it exceeded the scope of this project. And happy to do that. There has to be a separate conversation about that, because the other thing I don't want to do is, I want to be mindful of your budget, okay? So I'm happy to be of assistance. I want to be responsive to your needs here. And I'm happy to address each of your concerns.
Well, the budget's important, but we want to get this right also.
Yes.
So, I mean, we don't want to do this halfway. This is a big,
Yeah, and I
big
don't
thing.
want, I don't want to do it halfway, and but I want to be respectful at the same time.
We appreciate that.
So I'm happy to do it that way. Let me,
Getting with the town manager and Sean and getting with you, or what's the best way to proceed?
here's how I'd like to do it.
All right, let's try
I'd like
that.
for you all to email me your questions or observations, copying the manager and Sean, so they need to be in the loop. I don't want, not that you're going to exclude them, but I need to keep them in the loop. And then I will respond to all parties, and then respond with a tweaked ordinance. And then Sean and Randy and the other staff members and I will meet, and then I need to also meet with the town attorney. And then I think we do a work session, hopefully in 30 days, and then we start putting some of this to bed. Let me, if you're all comfortable with this, because I know it's 8 o'clock and I know you have other things to potentially do tonight, let
Well,
me
we
kind of,
plan on being here till midnight with all this.
well, and I wasn't going to go through every nook and cranny either,
Not all of
trust me, but let me kind of close out by reminding you what else we did, because I do have a little bit of pride in the work we did. Because, again, I'm going to dote on your staff. This has been a true partnership. And that includes your planning board as well. So, want to remind everybody that one of the nitpick, frustrating problems I had, your landscape regulations were in your zone, or subdivision ordinance. They're unenforceable where they are. They don't have any enforcement ability in your zoning ordinance because of where they are. Had to be moved. And I know you're talking very briefly with your attorney. He agreed they had to be moved. He'd like me to move them somewhere else, which is fine. He and I are going to figure out the best place to put them. Right now, they're in section 18-167. The other nitpick issue that I need to bring up to everybody, one of the big concerns I had is under Division 8, Permits, Administration, Enforcement, and Penalties. I don't think your staff really had the tools to be successful in terms of what was required with site plans, zoning permits, or your applicants didn't know what they had to submit to you all to get a permit. And that concerned me. Not because I don't think your staff was good at explaining things, but things need to be in writing. Everybody needs to know what they need to do. So I went to great lengths to spell out what's required for a zoning permit, what's required for a site plan, what's required for a sign permit, what's required for every permit that we're kind of touching with this amendment, so that there can be no confusion. I went a little overboard, I ain't gonna lie, but I think the detail we provided helps the town be very specific about what it needs, so there can be no confusion for your applicants or your staff, and everybody's on the same page.
And I think that's the reason Kate wants the definitions to be clear, for the same reason.
And I could respect that. I honestly would say I think the definitions are I think the definitions can be tweaked. I think they're a little clearer, but I also understand where you want me to go. And I'm happy to accommodate the request. It's going to be easy. I also freely admit, since I deal with this ordinance formatting hourly, it's easier for me to know what I'm talking about, and I respect the fact that you all don't see this daily.
And the people it's written for don't see it.
Right, and so it's easy for me, and I'm not trying to be cavalier with the comment, and I know you all know that, but it's easy for me to be cavalier with it because I deal with this probably more than I should. I need a life. We all know that. So with that being said, the other thing we did was make sure that your administrative section also provided some level of specificity on the special use permit process as terms of what's required for that. This is consistent with state statute. The one piece of feedback I am going to be looking for you to get, for you all to give me, I'd like you all to think about, and I would like you all to have this conversation probably amongst each other, which you can do with your attorney and with your manager, is on the in-focus recommendation about it going to your Board of Adjustment. You don't need to give me an answer tonight, but I think you all need to have that conversation and talk to your two experts here. I'm very adamant of where I think it should happen, but $1.50 nowadays will get me a cup of coffee, and I'm allowed to have whatever opinion I want. I just want to make sure you're happy, so. And with that, I really appreciate you all taking the time with me this evening. I look forward to your comments, and we will endeavor to respond to your questions and requests, and be back in hopefully 30 days and make sure that your comfort level is where it needs to be, and then we'll take your direction from there about how you wish to proceed.
Thank you so much, Michael.
No, thank you all.
And
It's
thank
been
you
a
for your
pleasure, and I
hard
look forward to
work.
continuing working with you.
And our desire is to have ordinances that are in compliance with the state and ones that we won't have to worry about changing in a year, so.
Well, we'll get you there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I have one comment. Not about this, though.
Okay.
We probably have to come out of the...
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
okay. No, thank you.
Mayor, could you proceed with the motion and second to continue?
Okay, do I hear a motion to continue working on our ordinances
So
and getting clarification and definitions, things that we need to make it clear?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, did you have another?
Now I have a comment.
Okay.
I will not be here for the September 17th meeting.
Well, we will miss you.
Thank you.
But anyway, thank you so much, and thank all of you for coming out. Randy, did you have anything else to say?
I'm good, Mayor.
Okay,
Thank you.
If not, and if there are no,
Oh, Lou has something.
I sent out an email for a survey about the new design on the existing website, but if y'all haven't for that, please fill it.
okay.
And I've sent it out to our sunshine list, and, I put it on our website, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and our X. So if y'all know people, please ask them to fill out the survey. We really want some input on the website
Okay.
design.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, at this time, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, let it know known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye.